I remember that Christmas Eve like it was yesterday. It wasn't the sparkling snow or the smell of frankincense and myrrh that stuck with me. It was the sharp, icy dagger of my Aunt Margaret's whisper. My name is Emma, and for 2 decades, I was the family's reigning expert in disappointment. The black sheep, the one who had potential, but never quite landed the golden life that my younger sister Jessica had apparently captured effortlessly. The whole family was gathered at the annual Christmas Eve Mass, a tradition so sacred my grandmother would rise from her grave to attend. I was standing near the back, having arrived fashionably late to minimize the pre-Mass interrogation. I was wearing a simple, elegant black turtleneck and tailored gray trousers, an outfit I thought was understated chic, but which my family interpreted as a cry for help. I'd just politely declined a third attempt from my cousin David to set me up with his incredibly stable friend in commercial insurance. As I turned to face the altar, I saw Aunt Margaret leaning close to my mother, her hand covering the side of her mouth, but not well enough. I watched my mother's shoulders slump just a fraction. Margaret's gaze slid over me, and then she leaned in closer to my mother. She still has that little online thing, dear, or is she probably unemployed again? The words, spoken in a hushed, judgmental tone, still echoed with the acoustic perfection of the cathedral ceiling. Probably unemployed. They didn't know I had just closed a $2.9 million deal that morning. My mother, bless her heart, gave the standard, practiced deflection. She's working on her passion project, Margaret. It's, very niche. Niche was family code for she makes no money and lives in a cardboard box. Jessica, standing beside her husband, Robert, gave me a pitying look, the kind of look reserved for stray dogs and failed entrepreneurs. Jessica, the golden child, had married a successful orthodontist and was the picture of domestic bliss, complete with the sprawling house and two perfect children. Her career, as a kindergarten teacher, was deemed wholesome and stable. My career, building a hyper-specific AI-driven marketing platform for small businesses, was apparently the equivalent of collecting bottle caps. The insults always came in a steady stream, particularly around the holidays. The week before, at my mother's house while helping her decorate the tree, Jessica had asked me, "Emma, are you sure you don't need a loan for Christmas gifts? Robert got me this stunning $8,000 diamond necklace, and I just feel bad you're still buying everything on sale." She said it with a sweetness that made the condescension taste even fouler. I simply smiled, tying a satin ribbon around a glass ornament, and said, "Thanks for the offer, Jess, but my clients have been incredibly generous this year." My generous clients had just paid my company Ascend Digital an $890,000 retainer for a 3-month contract. I had purchased Jessica's son, my favorite nephew, a top-of-the-line gaming computer, not from a sale rack, but from a private console developer. The tension between Jessica and I wasn't simple sibling rivalry. It was a deeply ingrained narrative where she was the success and I was the cautionary tale. I rented a sleek loft apartment downtown, perfect for my late nights, but Jessica always talked about its lack of a yard for a family. I drove a beautifully maintained 5-year-old Audi, practical and stylish, which she referred to as the car that screams still searching for stability. They never noticed the small details. The impeccably tailored Italian coat I wore, not a designer logo in sight, but costing more than Jessica's monthly mortgage payment. The low, hushed calls I sometimes took in the hallway where I used corporate jargon like Q4 projections and Series A funding with a calm authority. And the $1,500 fountain pen I always used to sign Christmas cards. These were my little secrets, the quiet evidence of a life they refused to acknowledge. But what they didn't know was that my niche passion project was about to become the biggest disruptor in the B2B marketing space. I had poured every ounce of my talent, every late night, and every dollar I had into Ascend Digital, foregoing the traditional, stable path they worshipped. While Jessica was celebrating her secure path, I was quietly building an empire. The big event was Christmas dinner at Jessica's house, a 6-hour marathon of forced cheer and passive-aggressive commentary. Her house, all marble countertops and high ceilings, was a fortress of conventional success. As soon as I walked in, carrying a ridiculously expensive bottle of obscure French wine, which I knew Robert wouldn't recognize, thereby dismissing it, the stacking of humiliations began. My mother greeted me with a hug that felt more like commiseration. Darling, I'm so happy you could make it. Now, remember to be gracious when Jessica talks about the Maldives. It's their anniversary gift. I hadn't even taken off my coat when Aunt Margaret pounced. She cornered me near the appetizer table, her eyes scanning my outfit again. Emma, that cashmere blend is lovely, but a nice sheath dress is much more appropriate for a dinner like this. Are you still doing your own thing? You really should listen to your mother and find something with benefits. Whenever I was near my family, I felt like a scientist trapped in the paleontological era. These dinosaurs must be designered, and they were bumping into me at every turn. The Citadel idea that training with someone else was the only option for guaranteed financial success was something I constantly had to contend with. I looked at Aunt Margaret and smiled. I understand your perspective, but I'm satisfied with my current career choice. I smiled sweetly. Aunt Margaret, this doing my own thing just paid for this sweater, my rent, and the down payment on a place I'm currently looking at. But thank you for the fashion advice. I tried to sound light, but inside, the resentment was a cold, hard knot. Later, over the turkey, the topic inevitably turned to Jessica's recent success. Robert, puffed up with self-importance, announced, Jessica's teaching is truly rewarding, and we just finished up the final documents on the expansion of my practice. The total value is now officially $4.8 million, a solid investment. The whole table beamed at Jessica, who blushed demurely. Then my father, in an attempt to be inclusive, turned to me. And how are things, Emma? Still busy with your computer business? It wasn't a question. It was an obligatory acknowledgement. I took a slow sip of wine. Things are excellent, Dad. In fact, I just had a meeting with the corporate lawyers last week to finalize the restructuring ahead of the next funding round. We're projecting a $23 million valuation by the end of Q1. The table went silent. Jessica let out a nervous little laugh. Oh, Emma, always with the big numbers. Is that like your aspirational goal? Good for you. She made it sound like I was talking about my fantasy football league. It was in that moment, as the entire family exchanged knowing glances that said, poor Emma, living in a fantasy world, that my phone buzzed. It was a text, quickly followed by a call. The caller ID was restricted, but I knew who it was. My lead corporate lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I excused myself and walked into the hallway pulling my phone to my ear. Little did my family realize that the phone call I received that day would change everything. The conversation was quick, professional, and exhilarating. Mr. Henderson confirmed that the due diligence was complete and the acquisition offer was solid. Congratulations, Miss Reed. The final offer is $2.9 million for the minority stake we discussed, with a mandatory 3-year lock-in for your CEO role and a 7-figure annual salary. We can wire the initial funds as soon as you give the final verbal approval. I said, Mr. Henderson, you have my verbal approval. Let's make it happen. I hung up the phone, taking a deep breath. The quiet hum of the family dinner drifted from the dining room. I leaned my head against the cool wall. I was tired of being underestimated. I was tired of the pity. I had fought this war alone for years, fueled by their doubt. I looked at the sleek, expensive handbag I had placed on the hall table, a quiet victory marker from a brand they'd never heard of. I had been keeping a secret that was about to come out. The internal struggle was over. The time for silence was past. I was walking back in, and I was going to set the record straight. I re-entered the dining room just as Robert was boasting about the financial responsibility of owning a whole life insurance policy. They all looked up, startled by the sudden stillness in my demeanor. I sat down calmly, picking up my fork. The trigger wasn't one grand insult, but a final, soul-crushing demand that pushed me over the edge. Aunt Margaret looked at my mother and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Dear, I saw that your water heater is finally failing. Why don't you let Robert look at getting you a decent replacement? Emma, I'm sure you're too busy with your projects, but a good son-in-law should step up." It wasn't just a dig at me. It was a public declaration that I was financially incapable of helping my own mother, while Jessica's husband was their savior. My mother started to protest weakly, "Margaret, please." I laid my fork down gently. The clink on the porcelain plate was surprisingly loud in the suddenly quiet room. I looked directly at Aunt Margaret, my voice perfectly steady, low, and clear. "Aunt Margaret, that's incredibly thoughtful of you, but I've already taken care of my mother's water heater, actually, and her furnace, and the $12,000 in roof repair she needed last month." Jessica frowned. "Emma, stop being dramatic. Mom told me she took out a small home equity loan for that. Are you saying you paid for it?" "Not entirely, Jess. I simply transferred the necessary funds to my mother's account. But that's not why I came back to the table." I reached into my handbag and pulled out 2 items. The first was a sleek black phone. I unlocked it and held it up, displaying the screen, showing a newly deposited wire transfer. The amount was clearly visible in bold black digits. As I was stepping out for that call, I was finalizing the details of the minority acquisition of my company, Ascend Digital, I explained, my tone purely factual, like reading a quarterly report. The total sale for that stake valued the company at $23 million, as I mentioned earlier. My portion of the initial acquisition payment, which just landed in my account, is exactly $2,900,000. I paused, letting the dollar amount hang in the air like a thundercloud. "That's $2.9 million, Jessica. Not an aspirational goal, a closed deal." The evidence was right there on the screen. Robert's mouth actually dropped open. Aunt Margaret looked utterly bewildered, blinking rapidly as if the glare from the phone screen was personally offensive. My father looked from the phone to my face, then back again. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the second item, a glossy, heavy magazine. Forbes magazine, the latest issue. I didn't have to open it. My picture, a professional, confident headshot, was clearly visible in the corner of the cover next to the headline, "The Women Reshaping B2B Tech, Emma Reed and Ascend Digital." And as for my sister's comment about my niche project and my mother's worry about me being unemployed, I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. I have a mandatory 3-year contract at a salary that rivals most Fortune 500 executives. I'm also happy to announce that I finalized the paperwork on my new primary residence, a $4.8 million historic property in the Gold Coast District, which I purchased in full, no mortgage. The property deed is in my lawyer's office, but I'd be happy to send you the Zillow link. The reaction was a perfect stage tableau of disbelief, shock, and panic. Disbelief came from Jessica. No way, Emma. That's typo. You probably just won an award. It's not that, Emma Reed. Shock came from my father, who stammered, You own a house in the Gold Coast? $4.8 million? Where did you... Panic came from Robert and Aunt Margaret, their eyes darting nervously.
Robert started, "Well, Emma, that's just the fantastic news. I always knew you had that entrepreneurial spark. If you ever need advice on structuring your personal finances, my financial advisor." I cut him off, my voice sharp but still controlled. "Robert, with all due respect, I now have a corporate legal team and a personal wealth manager handling my affairs. I think I'll be fine without your financial advice." My mother was the only one who didn't panic. She just looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears that were not of sorrow, but of sudden, overwhelming pride. "Oh, Emma," was all she managed. I was finally seeing them, not as the judges of my life, but as people who had simply been misinformed and blinded by their own limited definition of success. The truth was out, and it felt like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for 10 years. The aftermath was exactly as I had pictured. The stunned silence was replaced by a flurry of damage control. The fake apology started immediately. Aunt Margaret approached me later while I was pouring myself a glass of water, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Emma, darling, I feel absolutely terrible about what I said at Mass. That was completely out of line. I was just worried about you. You know, a girl needs stability." I fixed her with a level gaze. "I understand you were worried, Aunt Margaret, but worry doesn't excuse condescension. I haven't been unemployed since I graduated. I've been building a company that has, as of today, made me a multi-millionaire. The next time you feel the urge to comment on my career, I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that." I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply stated my boundary.
Jessica, however, was the hardest. She cornered me in the living room, her face red with a mixture of shame and jealousy. "Emma, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think? You made us look like fools. Robert is going to be furious about the Gold Coast house. We've been saving for years for a down payment." "I didn't let you think anything, Jessica," I said, putting my glass down. "You chose what you wanted to believe. You chose a narrative where you were the success and I was the failure. Every time you talked down to me, every time you asked if I needed a loan, every time you flaunted Robert's $4.8 million business, I was quietly working. I didn't hide my success. You simply refused to see it because it didn't fit into the box you built for me. And honestly, I stopped caring about your validation a long time ago." I set the final boundary. "Jessica, I love you, and I love Mom and Dad, but the constant comparisons, the veiled insults, and the pity stop today. We can have a relationship based on mutual respect, or we won't have one at all. I will not be your cautionary tale anymore." I didn't stay for the rest of the evening. After a quiet, heartfelt moment with my mother, where she simply said, "I knew you were special, honey," I retrieved my coat and walked out. I set up my thriving new life with a calm peace I hadn't known before. The Gold Coast home was stunning, a perfect mix of historic grandeur and modern tech. I still drove the Audi, but I also bought a small, zippy electric car for city driving. I spent the next few months flying between my company's new satellite offices, closing deals, and speaking at major tech conferences. My company's valuation quickly climbed, surpassing the $30 million mark within 6 months. The $2.9 million was just the beginning. I had done it all by myself, without the family's approval or belief. I had been conditioned to seek their validation, to feel like my success wasn't real until they acknowledge it. But the moment I revealed the truth, I realized something profound. My self-worth had already been built in the quiet years of hard work. Their shock wasn't my revenge. It was the side effect of their own narrow-mindedness. My peace was my revenge. The truth is, I'm still Emma. I'm still the person who likes quiet nights in and doesn't need to drive a flashy car. But now, I'm Emma Reed, the $2.9 million CEO, and the only validation I need is my own sense of accomplishment. I learned that the greatest power isn't showing people what you have. It's knowing what you have and letting their disbelief be their own problem. The most empowering message I can offer is this: build your life for yourself, in the quiet, away from the noise of others' expectations. When you finally stand up,
The success you've built will speak volumes, and what happened next will absolutely leave them speechless. You don't need their permission to be a triumph. You just need the quiet determination to become one.